What's the story, Morning Glory? What's the word, Hummingbird? Thank you so much for clicking on my channel and for joining me for this quick conversation about Justin Ross Harris. Justin Ross Harris is a father who was convicted of malice murder, among other things, back in 2016. His son had died in a hot car, and the prosecution was able to prove that this death was intentional, that Justice Harris had intentionally left his child in this car to die. Now, if I can remember correctly, he had his child with him in his car. I think they went to breakfast that morning together, him and his child. And then he forgot that the kid was in the car. He arrives at his job, his place of employment, and he forgot that the baby was in the car in the back seat. So he goes to work, he works a full day. At the end of the day, when he comes back to his car, the baby had already died. His 22-month-old son, Cooper Harris, had already passed away. So, through the investigations, law enforcement concluded or determined that this was an intentional death. I think he had even I think they had found evidence on his computer that he had Googled hot car deaths shortly before his own son died in a hot car. And the prosecution during the trial had brought up all kinds of evidence against him, including they had also filed charges against him regarding him victimizing sex crimes. He had committed sex crimes against a 16-year-old girl. He was sending her inappropriate pictures. He was sexting her. And so they had also thrown that into the pot as well, along with the murder charges of his son. So his attorneys had appealed the murder conviction because they believed that the jury had convicted him because they were persuaded by the extramarital affairs that were brought before the court, the sexting with the 16-year-old girl, his inappropriate behavior with the 16-year-old girl, that they thought that all of this stuff made him look like a really bad guy, and this persuaded them to also convict him of the murder charges. Kind of like, well, if he's the kind of guy that would cheat on his wife and go after young girls, then he's the kind of guy that would leave his son in a hot car on purpose to avoid paying child support or to get out of being a father and not have to deal with the responsibilities of being a father. So his defense lawyers obviously did a great job because the higher court in that state went ahead and overturned the murder conviction. Now, the sex charges still stuck. They were not appealing that. So he still is going to be serving the 12 years for the sex crimes, but the life sentence plus the 32 that he got for the murder of his son, all of that was overturned. So he will be granted a new trial. Now, throughout the whole entire trial, his wife stood by his side. His wife had said that he's a horrible husband, but he's still a good father. That, to me, I never quite understood how she could have thought that. Because of the fact that a man who goes after young girls and who preys on children, I don't see how they are a good father or a good parent. I just don't understand how that works, because I would be worried that this man might do something to his own child or to his own children. So it just boggled my mind that the wife was like, he's such a great dad, he's such a great dad, he's not that great of a husband, but he's a great dad. I never understood that. I mean, he left his child in a hot car for 8 hours, 7 to 8 hours. How is that a good dad? Now let's talk about hot car deaths. Now, I don't want to be too judgmental or too overly critical, because accidents do happen. And I think that maybe, like, if you take all the hot car deaths that involve children and babies, if you took 1,000 of them, I might believe that maybe one was an accident out of 1,000. I don't understand how people can forget that they have children in the car, because when my children were young and they would be in the back seat in their car seats, even when they were like, babies, infants, I was so worried about them in the back seat that there was no way that I could forget that they were back there, because I would be worried. I was so worried that they would accidentally choke, like maybe choke on their saliva, maybe their head isn't positioned right and they may like suffocate to death. I was constantly like checking on them, listening to hear them breathe, pulling over on the side of the road to make sure that everything was okay, that they didn't accidentally swallow their bib or like choke on their bib or choke on a pacifier or, anything like that. I was so overly concerned about my child in the back seat. I don't see how it's possible to forget that you have children in the back seat. Now, in this particular case, Justin Harris even had breakfast with his child that morning, I believe. It wasn't like, he just put the baby in the back seat and then was like driving off to work and then forgot the baby. I don't know how it could have happened, because I've tried and tried and tried to understand. Whenever I hear about a baby being left in the car and dying, I've tried to understand how this could happen. So it's become such an issue with parents leaving their children in the back seat of the car when the temperatures are really high. It's become such an issue that they even had suggested that parents take off one shoe, put it in the back seat, so that when you get to your destination and you come out of your car and you only have one shoe on, you'll remember that your other shoe is in the back seat. And then you'll go back there and you'll see, you'll remember that you have a child back there. That's how bad it's become, where people are completely forgetting that they have babies and small children in their back seat. I don't understand how that can happen. I just don't understand how that can happen, how you can forget that you have a baby in the back seat. But anyways, so I never believed him. I thought it was intentional. And it wasn't because of him sexting a 16-year-old. I didn't believe it because I think evidence had come out that he was actually Googling hot car deaths. So it's a sad day for those of us who truly thought that this man intentionally murdered his child in this really horrific way of leaving him to basically cook in the back seat like that. So hopefully, with this new trial, the new jury will still see through the BS and he will be convicted again of the murder of his child. My mind is made up with this because from what I heard and from what I read when I was keeping up with the case back then, I was convinced that this was done intentionally. This was not an accident at all. And all my beliefs of him doing this on purpose was the fact that he was Googling this information. Why are you Googling that? And then like days later, your son ends up dying in the same way that you were trying to look up online. Like, how is that? That's just too much of a coincidence. But hopefully the second trial will lead to a second conviction and he will get the life sentence again. And we can finally be done with this case. That is all that I have to say. Thank you so much for joining me on your way out. Please don't forget to rate the video. If you like this content, please subscribe and I'll definitely talk to you later.